I have not heard his voice in 15 years. And somehow his hands still say my name the way they did when we were children. He learned a language for a version of me he thought he'd already lost. I came back to Millbrook for my sister's wedding because she asked, and because I was still capable of surprise when I wanted to be. The town hadn't changed much. The same brick buildings huddled around the same frozen river, the same bakery on Crescent Street that still made those almond croissants I couldn't find anywhere else. But I had changed. I was used to being the only deaf person in most rooms, used to the careful way people spoke to me, the slight delay in every conversation while they remembered to face me, to speak clearly, to not look away. I was used to being work, so when I walked into the rehearsal dinner at the Old Grange Hall and saw Elijah Vance standing by the drink table, his hands moving in conversation with my niece, I stopped walking. Not because it was him, though it was, unmistakably, the boy who had been my shadow from ages 6 to 16, but because his hands were speaking, fluent, unhesitating, the kind of ease that comes from years of use, not a semester of community college ASL. He saw me, his hands went still. Then, Maya. Not my sister's name for me, not my mother's. The name he gave me when we were 7, when he decided Maya Chen was too serious for someone who laughed at his terrible jokes. He signed it with the old flourish, the Y pulled into a small spiral, the way he'd done when we were kids, and he'd just learned that names could have personality. I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't known was tight. "You're staring," my sister said, appearing at my elbow. "It's rude, even for you. I know him. You knew him 15 years ago. He's the best man, by the way. Mom thought it would be nice to have someone local who..." She caught herself, the way people do, the small edit they make when they remember who they're talking to, who could help with things. "He's a physical therapist now, runs the clinic on Maple. He signs." "I know, weird, right? He started learning after..." Another catch, more obvious this time. "After you left. Took him forever, apparently. Used to practice on anyone who'd sit still." I watched him across the room. He was listening to my niece now, some long story about flower arrangements, and his face held that particular stillness of someone waiting for their turn to sign. The concentration that looks like patience. I knew that look. I'd seen it on interpreters, on friends who tried, on strangers who gave up. But this wasn't trying. This was something else. He came to me. Of course he did. We were children together, and some part of us still knew the old rules. He didn't speak. He signed, slow enough to be clear, fast enough to show me he could. "You look exactly the same." I laughed, the huff of it visible. "Liar, I'm 31. I have wrinkles. Around your eyes, from laughing at my jokes." "Then they're your fault." Something shifted in his face. Relief, maybe, or recognition. The same thing I was feeling. The impossible sense that 15 years could be folded small enough to fit in this room, in the space between two people who had not chosen to stop speaking. We talked for 2 hours. He told me about the clinic, the patients, the way Millbrook had grown a coffee shop that actually knew what a flat white was. I told him about Chicago, my job in graphic design, the exhausting theater of every work meeting, where I had to decide whether to correct someone who'd misunderstood or let it go. He nodded in a particular way. Not the performative empathy of hearing people who've learned to nod at the right times, but the specific recognition of someone who knows what it costs to translate yourself all day. "You don't have to hear," he signed. "With me, I'll match you, however you want." I didn't realize I was crying until he handed me a napkin, his expression unchanged, as if this were ordinary. As if we were still the kind of people who could cry in front of each other. We were exactly that kind of people. I had forgotten. The next morning, my mother found me in the kitchen and said, "I didn't know he'd learned all that. The signing. Your father ran into him at the hardware store last year, and there he was, fingers flying. Said he'd been at it more than a decade. Why? Why what? Why would he do that?" I was spreading almond butter on toast, the movement giving me something to look at besides her face. We weren't in touch. We weren't anything. My mother was quiet. She has a particular silence, the kind that fills space rather than emptying it. He never said, "Your father asked," actually, pretty direct, you know how he is. And Elijah just said he'd always meant to learn, that he'd meant to for years. Meant to, the phrase sat wrong. You mean to learn Spanish before a trip to Barcelona. You mean to take up running. You don't spend 15 years becoming fluent in a language you have no one to speak with, not without something driving you. But when I saw him at the venue that afternoon, helping my sister's fiancé wrestle a folding table into submission, I forgot to be suspicious. He saw me and smiled, the old crooked smile, and signed, "Help me. He's stronger than he looks." You're a physical therapist. You can't handle one table? I'm a healer, not a laborer. I laughed, and he laughed, and the sound of it, his voice rougher than I remembered, but unmistakably his, made me still for just a moment. I had forgotten he had a voice. In my memory, he was all hands and expression, the way children are before you sort them into categories. But he was speaking now to my sister's fiancé, and then signing to me, and the translation between them felt seamless in a way that nothing in my adult life had ever been. You don't have to voice for me, I signed. I can read lips. I know I like the signing, if that's okay. It was more than okay. It was like being given a room where the walls were the right distance apart, where the light came from directions that didn't hurt your eyes. We worked together in silence that wasn't silence, passing tools and making jokes about my sister's taste in tablecloths. And I felt something I hadn't let myself want, the possibility of being known without effort. That night, at the informal gathering my parents threw for out-of-town guests, I found myself watching him across the room and realizing I was doing the thing I hated, positioning myself to see, angling for sightlines, the constant geometry of deafness in hearing spaces. But then he moved, shifted his chair, made sure he was facing me even when he was talking to someone else, not obvious about it, just present, available. I caught him at it. You don't have to do that. Do what? Angle toward me. I can manage. I know you can. He paused, his hands stilling in that way they did when he was choosing words carefully. I'm not managing you, I'm choosing you. The warmth of it spread through me like something physical. I wanted to ask about the 15 years, about why he'd learned, about what he wanted from this reunion that he hadn't sought out. But my sister was calling me to approve centerpiece arrangements, and the moment passed, and I let it pass because I was greedy for more of this feeling, this ease, and I didn't want to risk it yet. The first hinge came 3 days later at the bakery on Crescent Street. I was buying croissants for my parents, and Mrs. Patterson was behind the counter, the same woman who'd sold us cookies after school, now white-haired and slower with her hands but still sharp-eyed. Elijah Vance, she said, when she saw me signing with my niece who'd come along. He's something, isn't he? Started coming in here years ago, practicing on me. Poor boy, he was terrible at first. Fingers all thumbs. She laughed, the warm sound of it filling the small shop. I told him, Elijah, why are you doing this? You got a deaf cousin I don't know about? And he said no cousin, just someone he used to know, someone he thought he'd never see again. She rang up my croissant, still talking. Kept at it, though. Every week for years, he'd come in, try a new phrase. Asked me to only sign with him, no voice, so he'd learn proper. I thought he was crazy, you know. Who learns a whole language for a ghost? I stood there with my wallet open, the croissants in their paper bags suddenly heavy. A ghost. 15 years of practice. Someone he thought he'd never see again. My niece was pulling at my sleeve, asking about hot chocolate. And I managed the transaction somehow, but my hands felt clumsy, my face stiff. Outside, in the cold February air, I tried to think. He'd started within a year of my leaving, not after reconnecting, not with any hope of use. Just started. Built a skill for an audience of none. I found him at the clinic that afternoon. He was between patients, sitting at a desk that looked out on the frozen river, and he smiled when he saw me, the unguarded smile that made something in me want to protect him from whatever this was. Mrs. Patterson told me, I signed, about you learning, starting right after. Yes, I didn't finish, didn't need to. The accident was the unspoken referent in every conversation about my departure, the reason I'd left, the reason I'd stayed away. His hands went still. Then, she has a big mouth. She was proud of you. She thought you were dedicated. I was dedicated. The sign he used was the one for commitment, for vows kept. I am dedicated. To what? To who? You didn't know you'd see me again. He looked at me for a long moment. The river behind him was gray ice, the kind that holds and doesn't hold. And I thought of being 16. Thought of the way ice could look solid from above and be nothing beneath. To the possibility, he signed finally, to not being finished when I thought I was. It was the kind of answer that could mean anything. I chose to let it mean devotion. I chose to hear it as the romantic thing it sounded like. A man who couldn't let go, who prepared for a reunion he didn't believe would come, who built a bridge to nowhere and kept it maintained. I had spent 15 years in hearing spaces being told my deafness was inconvenience, was limitation, was something to work around. The idea that someone had made it central, had built toward it, felt like a kind of miracle. I stepped closer to him. Show me more, I signed. What else do you know? And he showed me. Signs I'd forgotten. childhood slang we'd invented, the private language of two children who'd been each other's only true friends. He'd preserved it all, added to it, built something larger than memory, larger than hope. I didn't ask why, I didn't want to know why. I wanted this, the warmth of being chosen, the ease of being met, the particular intimacy of shared silence that wasn't empty but full. The near misses started the next day. We were walking by the river, the path cleared of snow but slick with ice, and I made some joke about being careful, about not wanting to repeat history. I meant it lightly. The accident had been random, bad luck, the ice thinner than it looked. I'd made my peace with that narrative years ago, but Elijah stopped walking. His face went strange, still but wrong, like a mask held too long. "What?" I signed. "Nothing. You're right. Be careful." He started walking again, faster, and I had to hurry to keep up. I thought he was cold or tired, or that I'd touched some professional nerve. He worked with accident victims after all, people who'd lost mobility, lost futures. The ice was his livelihood now, in a way. I let it go. That night, at dinner with my family, my father mentioned the old pond behind the elementary school, how they'd finally filled it in after what happened with Maya. Elijah's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. I saw it, the small freeze, the recovery, but I was arguing with my sister about wedding shoes, and I filed it away as nothing. He found me after, in the hallway. "I'm sorry," he signed, "for earlier, by the river." "You don't have to apologize for walking fast. Not that." He looked at the floor, then at me. "For not, I want to tell you something. About before, about why I learned to sign." I waited. The hallway was narrow, the wallpaper the same pattern I'd known as a child, and I felt suddenly young, suddenly unprepared for whatever this was. But my sister called my name. "Maya, the photographer's here. We need you." And the moment broke. Elijah's hands fell to his sides. Later, he signed. "Tomorrow, I'll find you." He didn't find me the next day. The wedding preparations swallowed everything. Last-minute crises with the caterer, my mother's anxiety about the weather, my sister's escalating nerves. I saw him across rooms, signing with guests, helping with setup, and each time our eyes met, he would start toward me and be pulled away. Or I would. The distance between us felt accidental and intentional at once, and I couldn't tell which. That evening, he appeared at my parents' door with hot chocolate from the new coffee shop. "I brought you this," he signed. "The flat white you mentioned." And he stopped, looked at my face, at whatever he saw there. "You look happy." "I am happy. This is good. Being here, with you, it's better than I expected." The words were true. I watched him receive them. Watched something complicated move across his face. He could have spoken then. I see that now. The hallway was empty, the house quiet. My sister's wedding not until the day after tomorrow. He had time. He had opportunity. Instead, he handed me the coffee and signed, "I'm glad. I'm so glad, Maya," and left. I stood in the doorway with 2 coffees cooling in my hands, wondering what I'd missed. The second near miss came at the dress fitting. My sister had asked me to be her witness, and Elijah was there for his brother, the other best man, who was running late. We were alone in the small room above the bridal shop, the mirrors multiplying us into infinity, and I was making her laugh with signs about the absurdity of Tool when Elijah went still. He was looking at a photograph on the wall, a winter scene, children on ice, the kind of generic decoration that fills small-town businesses. "What?" I signed. "Nothing. It's nothing." But his hands were shaking. I saw it, the small tremor, quickly controlled. I'd known him as a child, known his body the way children know each other, and I knew this was not nothing. "Elijah." He turned to me. The mirrors showed us from every angle. 2 people who had been children together, who had become strangers, who were becoming something else. I could see the want in his face, the need to speak, the fear that held it back. "There was a day," he started, "before you left, before the door opened." His brother, apologetic, loud, the moment shattered into social obligation and wedding logistics. I watched Elijah compose himself, watched him become pleasant and helpful and present, and I thought, he is practicing again. This is practice for something he hasn't done yet. I should have pushed. I see that now. But I was enjoying him too much, enjoying us too much, and I didn't want to be the person who demanded pain in exchange for pleasure, so I let it go again. I chose the warmth over the warning. The third near miss was worse. We were at the pond, the new park where the old elementary school had been, the filled-in space where water used to be. I hadn't been back since the accident, hadn't wanted to, but my sister wanted photos there, for old time's sake, and I was trying to be the person who could do this, who could stand on the edge of memory and not fall in. Elijah found me alone, looking at the place where the ice had been. "You don't have to do this," he signed. "We can tell her you weren't feeling well." "I'm fine, it's just ground now, just grass." "Maya, my name," with the old flourish. "Please?" "Please what?" He opened his mouth, closed it, signed. "Please be careful. Please let me take you back to the car. Please." He stopped, changed direction. "Please let me take care of you, however you'll let me." It was the wrong thing to say, and the right thing. I heard the wrongness, the urgency, the desperation, the way it didn't match the moment. But I wanted the rightness. I wanted to be taken care of, to be chosen, to be the person someone built a language for. I let him drive me back. I let him make me tea at my parents' house. I let the conversation turn to safer things, his patience, my designs, the strange smallness of Millbrook after Chicago. I felt him wanting to speak and didn't help him. I was afraid of what he would say. I was more afraid of losing what we were building than of discovering what we'd already broken. That night, I dreamed of ice, of falling, of hands reaching for me and missing. I woke with the old panic, the sense of being underwater, of sound happening somewhere above me that I couldn't reach. In the dream, there had been a voice I couldn't hear that I somehow knew was saying my name. The fourth near miss was the worst because I almost saved it. We were at the rehearsal dinner, finally, the wedding tomorrow, everything culminating. I was sitting beside him at the long table, our thighs nearly touching, and Mrs. Patterson was across from us, telling stories about the bakery, about Elijah's early attempts at signing. He was so serious about it, she said, turning to include me. I asked him once, I said, "Elijah, what are you punishing yourself for?" Because that's what it looked like, like penance, like he was working off some debt. I felt him go still beside me. I turned to look at him, and his face was empty. Carefully, deliberately empty. Punishment? I signed. "For what?" He started to answer. His hands lifted, shaped the beginning of something. I saw the words forming. For the ice, for the day, for... But my sister was standing, glass in hand, calling for attention. The toast, the moment, the social script that demanded we perform gratitude and celebration, and not whatever this was. Elijah's hands fell. He smiled. The performance of it convincing to anyone who hadn't known him at 7, at 10, at 16. He raised his glass with the others. He mouthed the words I couldn't hear, and I let him. I let the moment pass because I was afraid, because I wanted one more night of this warmth before whatever cold was coming, because I was still choosing the story I wanted over the story that was true. The second hinge came the next day, at the wedding itself. Not during the ceremony, that was beautiful. My sister radiant. Everything perfect in the way weddings are perfect because they insist on it. But after, during the reception, when the toast started and the alcohol flowed, and people's memories grew soft and dangerous, Elijah's brother spoke first. Funny, warm, the usual things. Then my father, brief and emotional. Then Mrs. Patterson, uninvited but expected, the town elder who remembered everyone when they were small. "I remember Maya and Elijah," she said, her voice carrying in the way that voices do when the speaker doesn't need amplification. "At the pond that winter, before everything." She turned to me, smiling. "You were fearless, Maya, always were. Elijah used to dare you to things, and you'd do them just to prove you could." I felt something cold in my stomach. Dare you? The phrase sat wrong, the way my mother's meant to had sat wrong. "He dared you onto the ice that day, didn't he?" Mrs. Patterson continued. "I remember your mother telling me after, when you were in the hospital, how Elijah wouldn't leave your side, how he kept saying it was his fault, his dare, his..." She stopped. Finally, she saw my face. The room had gone quiet in stages, the way rooms do when people realize something is happening that they haven't been prepared for. I looked at Elijah. He was standing across the room, frozen, the same stillness I'd seen by the river, in the hallway, in every moment when he'd almost spoken and hadn't. But this time I understood it. This time I saw it for what it was, not hesitation, but habit. 15 years of not saying, of building a language instead of using his own, of preparing for a reunion he didn't believe would come because he couldn't believe he deserved it. "You dared me," I signed. My hands were clumsy, the signs imprecise. "You dared me onto the ice." He crossed the room to me. People moved out of his way, the parting of a sea that didn't want to be involved. When he reached me, he didn't sign. He spoke, his voice rough, audible to everyone. The first time I'd heard him address me this way. "I dared you. I was showing off. I said you wouldn't do it, and you did, and I let you, and the ice..." He stopped, swallowed. "I pulled you out. I got you out, but you weren't breathing, and I thought..." His hands came up, the signs faster than I could follow, then slowing. "I thought I killed you. I thought I killed my favorite person in the world." The room was very quiet. I could feel my mother's hand on my arm. My sister's face turned toward us, the weight of witness on whatever was happening. You never told me, I signed. All these years, you learned to sign, you found me again, you never told me. How could I? His hands were shaking now, the fluency I'd admired becoming fragmentation. You were happy, you are happy, with me these days, you're happy. How could I take that and tell you? He stopped, changed direction. I practiced for 15 years so that if I ever saw you again, I could say I'm sorry, in your language, in the way that would matter most. And then I saw you and you smiled at me, and I couldn't. I couldn't be the person who made you stop smiling. I understood then, the warmth I'd felt, the devotion I'd read in his fluency. It was real, but it was also penance. Every hour of practice was an hour of remembering what he'd done. Every fluent conversation was proof that he hadn't forgotten, would never forget. Had built his life around the shape of this debt. I thought it was an accident, I signed. All these years, I thought the ice was thin. I thought I was unlucky. I stopped. The narrative I'd built, the story of random misfortune that let me be blameless, that let me be simply unlucky rather than betrayed, it was crumbling. In its place was something harder, the knowledge that someone I loved had risked me for pride, had watched me fall, had spent 15 years preparing to apologize for something I hadn't known needed forgiving. I need to leave, I signed. I can't. I left. I walked out of my sister's wedding, out of the Grange Hall, into the February cold that felt cleaner than the air inside. I heard footsteps behind me, knew it was him, kept walking. He didn't catch up until the river, the frozen river, the same one that ran behind his clinic, behind my childhood, behind everything. I stood on the bank looking at the ice, and he stood beside me, not touching, waiting. Why here? I signed without looking at him. Because this is where I learned to be careful, to be slow, to test the ice before I walk on it. You didn't test it that day. I know, I was 16 and stupid, and I wanted you to think I was brave. I wanted to be the reason you did brave things. He paused. I got what I wanted, just not the way I wanted it. I turned to look at him, his face was wet. I couldn't tell if it was tears or the cold, and I hated that I couldn't tell. Hated that 15 years had made me unable to read him the way I once had. The signing I signed. Was it for me or for you? Yes, he said. Spoke it, then signed. Both, always both. I wanted to be ready for you. I also wanted to be someone who deserved to be ready. And if I'd never come back, then I would have been someone who tried, who spent 15 years learning to say sorry in the language of the person I hurt most. That seemed, he stopped, shrugged, the gesture too small for what he was describing. That seemed like enough. It had to be enough. I looked at the ice, at the gray surface that hid depths I couldn't see. I thought of being 16, of the fall, of the dark water and the cold and the hands that had pulled me out. His hands, they had always been his hands, saving me, reaching for me, learning to speak in the way I could hear. I need time, I signed. Not to forgive you. I don't know if I can forgive you. I need time to figure out if I can forgive myself for not knowing, for building a story that made me innocent when I wasn't innocent. I was just ignorant. For wanting your devotion so much, I didn't ask what it cost. It cost everything, he signed. That's the thing, it cost everything, and I would pay it again. I am paying it now. I will keep paying it as long as you let me near enough to try. That's not healthy, I signed. That's not in. I know. He smiled, the crooked smile, but sadder than I'd seen it. I know what it is, I've known for 15 years, but I'm here, Maya. I'm finally here with you, in the language I built for this moment. Tell me what to do with it. Tell me how to be better than my guilt. I didn't know. I stood on the bank of the frozen river with the boy who'd been my best friend, the man who'd become something else, and I didn't know how to be in this story. The version where I was simply unlucky had been comfortable. The version where someone I trusted had risked me for pride. That version had no place for me to stand. But I was standing, the ice was holding, and he was beside me, having finally said the thing he'd spent 15 years preparing to say. Come back to the wedding, I signed. Not for me, for my sister. We'll figure out the rest after. Will we? I don't know, but I'm cold, and you're here, and I don't want to be alone right now. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even the beginning of forgiveness, but it was something. It was a choice to stay in the story, rather than walk away from it, to see what could be built on ground that wasn't as solid as I'd believed. We walked back together, not touching, but together. The final turn came a month later. I'd gone back to Chicago, tried to resume my life, found I couldn't. The story I'd told myself was crumbling in small ways every day. The random accident, the simple misfortune, the narrative that let me be brave survivor rather than betrayed friend. I kept seeing the ice, kept feeling the dare I hadn't known I was accepting. I called him, video call so we could sign. I need to see you, I signed. Not like before, I need to understand what happened, the whole thing, not just your version. He came to Chicago, stayed in a hotel near my apartment, met me in neutral spaces, told me everything. The dare, stupid, thoughtless, the product of 16-year-old pride, the fall, how he'd watched me go through, how the sound of it had been the last thing he'd heard before he jumped in after me. The rescue, pulling me out, the CPR, the ambulance, the hospital vigil where he'd promised whatever gods were listening that he would learn, would change, would become someone who could meet me again on equal ground. Why didn't you tell me, I asked, every conversation. In the hospital, after, when I woke up. You were different, he signed. The doctor said, the hearing loss. They weren't sure if it would be permanent. You were scared. Your parents were scared. And I was... He stopped. I was the reason. I couldn't be the reason, and also the comfort. I couldn't be both. So you left. So I failed. I failed again by leaving, by not finding a way to be present in my failure. I told myself I was giving you space. I was giving myself escape. And the signing started 6 months later, when I realized I wasn't going to stop thinking about you, when I realized that if I ever saw you again, I needed to be able to say, he stopped. I needed to be able to say anything, in any way you'd hear. I sat with this, sat with him, in my small apartment, in the city where I'd built a life that didn't include him. I thought about the cost of forgiveness, not to him, but to me, the story I'd lose, the innocence I'd thought was mine, the identity as unlucky rather than wronged. I have to give up something, I signed finally. To forgive you. I have to give up the idea that my life was just bad luck, that I didn't matter enough to anyone for them to hurt me on purpose. You mattered, he signed. That's the whole point. I was stupid because you mattered. I learned because you mattered. I'm here because you mattered, and I failed you, and I can't stop trying to be someone who won't fail you again. You might fail me again. I might. He didn't flinch from it. I'm human. I'm still the person who dared you onto thin ice. But I'm also the person who jumped in after you, who learned your language, who spent 15 years preparing to apologize because I couldn't imagine not apologizing, even if I never got the chance. I looked at him, at the man he'd become, built around the wound he'd made, at the warmth that was real, that had always been real, even when I didn't understand its source. I'm not ready, I signed, to be us again. Whatever us would be. I know. But I'm not ready to be done either, with figuring this out. With you. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. The tears I'd wondered about before, and this time, I knew. That's enough, he signed. That's more than I expected. That's everything. It wasn't everything. It wasn't even most things. But it was a beginning, or a middle, or whatever came after the long preparation and the hard revelation. We were together in a city that was neither of ours, speaking a language he'd built for a ghost, and I was choosing to stay. Choosing to see what could be made from the ruins of the stories we'd both told ourselves. The ice was still there. The ice would always be there, literal and otherwise. But we were learning to walk on it together, testing each step, not pretending it was safe but not refusing to move either. That winter, he moved to Chicago, found a job at a clinic near my apartment. We were careful with each other, the way people are who know how much damage they can do. We signed more than we spoke. The language he'd built becoming ours shared, no longer his, alone. I learned his history of the years we'd been apart, and he learned mine. And we built something new that included the old wound, rather than pretending it had healed clean. At my sister's first anniversary, we went back to Millbrook, stood by the river together, the ice thick and gray, and I signed. I used to think forgiveness was about letting someone off the hook, about being generous, about being the bigger person. And now I think it's about not letting your past be smaller than it was, not pretending the hurt didn't happen so you can feel okay again. The hurt happened. You caused it. I didn't know, and then I did, and that changed everything, and I'm still here. Why? I looked at the ice, at the place where I'd fallen, where he'd pulled me out, where we'd both been remade. Because you learned my name in a language I can hear. Because that matters, even if it started in guilt. Because I'm tired of being the only person in my story, and you're the only person who was there, who remembers, who... I stopped. Started again. Because forgiveness cost me something real, and I'm willing to pay it. Not for you, for me, for the version of me that can hold the whole truth and still choose to stay. He didn't answer, just took my hand, the way he had when we were children, the way he hadn't when we were adults, too careful, too afraid. His hand was warm, the ice was cold. We stood together in the space between, and I felt finally the shape of what we were becoming. Not healed, not innocent, but present. Here, together in the language he'd built, the language we'd made ours, the words that could hold even this. The winter would end, the ice would melt. We would keep learning to speak to each other in all the ways that mattered, not pretending the fall hadn't happened, but not letting it be the only story we told. There were other stories. There would be more. His hands found mine in the cold, shaped the old sign, the childhood name, the flourish I'd loved at 7 and loved again at 31. Maya, he said, in the language he'd built for this. Still here, still trying. Still here, I answered, still listening. And we were. We walked back from the river through streets I barely recognized, the town having changed its face in the years I'd been gone, and I found myself watching him navigate the unfamiliar. The new coffee shop where the old pharmacy had been. The apartment building where his childhood home once stood. He moved through these changes with the ease of someone who had witnessed them day by day, and I felt again the weight of time I hadn't spent. The incremental transformations I'd missed while building my life elsewhere. At my parents' house, he stopped at the bottom of the steps. I should go, he signed. Give you space, and give you... Come in, I said. My mother already saw us. She'll have questions if you leave now. It wasn't the real reason. The real reason was that I didn't want to be alone with my new knowledge. Didn't want to sit in the room where I'd recovered and sort through what I'd learned. I wanted witness. I wanted the distraction of social performance, the temporary shelter of other people's expectations. My mother was in the kitchen, pretending not to have been watching the window. She looked at Elijah with the careful neutrality she'd perfected over years of managing other people's crises. And I saw him recognize it, the professional warmth, the boundaries intact. Elijah was just leaving, I said, speaking because she would, because the dance of hearing and deaf in this house had its own choreography. Nonsense, my mother said. Stay for dinner, there's plenty. Your mother used to make that casserole, remember? The one with the wild rice? I've been trying to recreate it for years. Elijah's hands moved, stopped. He was caught between languages, between the intimacy of signing with me and the social obligation of voicing for my mother. I watched him choose, watched him step back into the hearing world he'd occupied before me. She never wrote it down, he said, his voice rougher than I'd expected. The 15 years of disuse audible. Said it was by feel, by taste, by love, my mother said, with the small smile that meant she was making a point she wouldn't explain. That's what she always said. You taste for love. Dinner was strange. My father had returned from whatever errand had taken him away, and my sister was still glowing with wedding aftermath, and the 4 of us, 5 with Elijah, sat around the table performing normalcy while I sat with the knowledge of what he'd done, what he'd hidden, what he'd built in the space of that hiding. I watched him talk to my father about the clinic, about the changing healthcare landscape in small towns, about the young doctors who came and left because Millbrook couldn't promise the careers they wanted. I watched him become someone I didn't know, someone who had learned to exist in rooms where I wasn't present, and I felt a jealousy I hadn't expected. Not of other women, but of other lives, other versions of him that had nothing to do with me. After, in the hallway, he caught my arm. You're angry, he signed. Not just hurt, angry. I'm everything, I signed back. I don't have names for all of it yet. I should go. Yes, but neither of us moved. The house was full of my family, of wedding gifts still unwrapped, of the life I'd left and kept leaving, and I couldn't stand in this threshold forever, couldn't keep being the person who was deciding whether to forgive. The clinic, I signed. Tomorrow, show me where you work. Why? Because I need to see what you built without me, for me, around me. I need to understand the shape of it. He nodded, the old gesture, the one that meant agreement without satisfaction. Morning, 9, I'll wait for you. He left. I watched him go, his coat dark against the snow, and I felt my mother appear behind me the way she always did, her presence announced by warmth rather than sound. He's in love with you, she said. Has been, probably. That kind of learning, that kind of waiting. It's not guilt alone, Maya. Guilt doesn't sustain like that. I turned to look at her. You knew about the dare. You knew, and you never told me. Her face changed. The professional warmth cracked, and I saw something harder underneath. Something that had been managing this knowledge for 15 years. You were 16. You were deafened. You were traumatized. You were leaving for a city where you knew no one. What would I have added? Telling you that your best friend had dared you onto that ice. That he'd pulled you out but couldn't stay to watch you wake up? You should have told me. Yes. She said it simply. No defense, no justification. I should have. Your father thought it would be another trauma, another loss, when you were already losing so much. And I agreed. And I kept agreeing every year that passed. It became its own kind of secret, its own kind of wound. I stood in the hallway of my childhood and felt the house expand around me, full of rooms I hadn't entered, full of conversations I'd never been part of. The narrative of my life, random accident, brave recovery, successful escape, had been maintained by other people's choices, other people's silences. Does everyone know? I asked. In town? Am I the last person to understand my own story? Not everyone. Mrs. Patterson remembers, a few others, Elijah's mother, before she died. My mother's hand found mine, the way hands do when words are insufficient. He told her, years later, when he started learning to sign. She said it was the first time she'd seen him cry since childhood. I pulled my hand away, not angry, not yet, still processing, still understanding that my anger had targets I hadn't identified. I need to sleep, I said. Tomorrow. We'll talk tomorrow. But I didn't sleep. I lay in the room where I'd recovered, where I'd learned to be deaf, where I'd packed my bags for Chicago with the certainty that I was escaping misfortune, rather than fleeing a truth no one would speak. I thought of Elijah in his apartment, in whatever space he'd built for his guilt and his practice, and his hope that I would return. I thought of the hours he'd spent with Mrs. Patterson, fingers stumbling, building fluency for a conversation he couldn't imagine having. At 3 a.m, I got up, dressed, walked through the sleeping house and out into the cold, the February night sharp enough to clarify, to punish, to demand attention. I walked to the river, to the place where we'd stood, and I found him there. He didn't seem surprised. I come here, he signed, when I can't sleep, which is often. Since when? Since always. Since I was 16 and pulled you out and didn't know if you were breathing, if you'd ever breathe again, if... He stopped. The signs fragmented, reformed. I come here to remember what I did, what I cost, what I almost lost. And now? Now I come here to remember what I found, what I was given, what I still don't deserve. I stood beside him on the bank. The ice was different at night, the darkness making it seem more solid than it was, the moonlight giving it a false gleam of safety. I thought of all the times I'd walked on ice since, careful, testing, never trusting appearance. I thought I was being prudent. I'd been being someone who'd been betrayed by surfaces, who'd learned that solid-looking things could give way. I need to tell you something, I signed, about Chicago, about why I stayed away. He turned to face me, waited. I built a life there where no one knew me before, where no one remembered the girl who could hear, who fell through ice, who emerged different. I told myself it was independence, self-creation, but it was also. I struggled for the sign, made one up when I couldn't find it. It was also hiding, from this, from knowing that someone had done this to me, and that I loved them, and that I couldn't reconcile those things. You loved me. I loved you. I have loved you in every version of this story I've told myself. The version where you were my childhood friend who drifted away. The version where we were too young to know what we felt. The version where... I stopped. I never had a version where you dared me onto that ice, and I loved you anyway. That version wasn't available to me, because no one told me. I'm sorry, I know, you've been sorry for 15 years. I need you to be something else now. What? I looked at the ice, at the darkness that hid its thin places, its currents, its dangerous depths. I need you to be present, not preparing, not practicing, not building towards some future apology. I need you to be here, in this, whatever this is, with all of it unresolved. I don't know how. Then learn. You've learned harder things. He was quiet for a long moment. The river moved beneath the ice, the sound I couldn't hear but could see in the slight shifting of the surface, the pressure finding its way through. The clinic, he signed finally. Tomorrow, come see what I built, and I'll try, not preparing, just being, however I am. The clinic was smaller than I'd imagined. A converted Victorian on Maple Street with a ramp I'd designed in my head before I saw it, the slope gentle, the railings placed for hands that might be unsteady. He'd done well, I could see it immediately. The attention to bodies in space, to the ways architecture could welcome or exclude. Inside, the reception area was warm, full of light, and a woman at the desk signed, "Good morning," with the casual fluency of someone who used this language daily. I looked at Elijah. "I hire for it," he signed. "When I can, there are more of us than people realize. Deaf, hard of hearing, codas, interpreters. We're here. We just need to be asked." He showed me through the space, the treatment rooms, the equipment he'd chosen for accessibility, the small kitchen where patients could make tea and wait in comfort. Everything spoke of intention, of someone who had thought deeply about bodies and their needs, about the ways the world could be made more welcoming. In his office, photographs covered one wall. I approached them slowly, recognizing the progression. Elijah in his 20s, awkward at some conference, signing with uncertain hands. Elijah with patients, with colleagues, with groups I couldn't identify. And then, me. A photograph I didn't remember, 16 years old, laughing at something off camera, my hair wet from swimming, my ears unremarkable, unremarked upon. "Where did you get this?" "Your mother, years ago." I asked if I could have it, and she understood, I think, what it meant to me. I stared at the girl in the photograph, the girl who didn't know, who would fall through ice and emerge into a different life, a different self, different understandings of trust and risk and love. "This is what you looked at," I signed. "While you learned, this is who you were learning for." Yes. And if I'd been different, if the accident had changed me in ways you couldn't sign for, then I would have learned differently. I would have learned whatever was needed. I turned from the photograph to face him. He was watching me with the expression I'd learned to read in childhood, the stillness that meant he was waiting, that he was prepared for whatever I would say, that he had already imagined my rejection and was ready to receive it. "I want to try something," I signed. "A session. Here. With you." "You're not a patient." "No. I'm someone who needs to understand what you've built, what it means, what it cost." He hesitated. I watched him want to refuse, want to protect this space from the complication I represented, want to keep his professional self separate from the history we shared. Then, "Yes. Okay. Whatever you need." The session was unlike anything I'd expected. He began with questions, not about the accident, not about our history, but about my body now, how I held tension, where I carried stress, the ways my deafness had shaped my physical experience of the world, the constant visual scanning, the neck strain from lip reading, the way I slept, woke, moved through space with awareness that hearing people didn't share. His hands on my shoulders were professional. I felt him maintain that boundary, felt the effort it cost him, and I understood something new. His fluency in my language was also a barrier. It allowed him to serve me, to care for me, without the vulnerability of his own voice, his own words, his own unmediated self. "You're hiding behind the signing," I signed, when he paused. "Even now, even here. This is my profession. This is your refuge." He stepped back. His hands found each other. The gesture I'd learned meant he was thinking, choosing, preparing despite his promise. "What do you want from me?" he signed. "I've told you the truth. I've shown you what I built. I'm here, as present as I know how to be. And you're still—" He stopped, changed direction. "You're still asking for something I don't know how to give. I want you to voice." "What?" "I want you to speak. To me. Not to my mother, not to patients. To me. In the way you can't prepare, can't practice, can't get right. I want to be difficult for you. I want to be work." "Why?" "Because you've made me easy. You've made me effortless with your 15 years of practice. And I need to know what we are when we're both struggling, when neither of us is fluent, when we have to try." He was still for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice rough, uncertain, the voice I hadn't heard since childhood. "I don't know if I can. Try. Maya." My name, spoken, sounded strange, foreign and intimate at once. I have not said your name aloud in 15 years. I have practiced it in my head, in whispers, in the moments before sleep. But I have not— He stopped, swallowed. I was afraid that if I spoke you, I would lose the sign, that the voice would replace the hands, and I would have nothing left to offer. "Offer now. Both. Let them be imperfect." He spoke again, halting, searching for words he hadn't used in this context. You are the way you move through space. The way you... He stopped, frustrated, and signed. The way you take up room has always been important to me. You were small as a child, but you occupied space like you owned it, like it owed you. I loved that. I dared you onto the ice because I wanted to see you own that space too. And you did. You did. And it... He couldn't continue in voice. The signs took over, faster now, less careful. It broke my heart. It broke everything. I pulled you out and you weren't breathing, and I thought I'd killed the only person who ever made me feel like I could take up space too. I sat with this, with the revelation that his dare had been love, twisted by 16-year-old pride into something dangerous. That my fall had been the destruction of his self-image as well as my hearing. That we'd both been remade by that moment, in different directions, toward different compensations. I need to go, I said, speaking because he was speaking, because I wanted to meet him in the difficulty. I need to think. This is more than I expected, more than I know what to do with. Will you come back? I don't know. Will you? He stopped, changed course. Will you let me know, however you decide, however long it takes? I'll be here. I'm always here. I left him in the clinic he'd built for ghosts, for possibilities, for versions of me he thought he'd lost. I walked through Millbrook in the cold February morning, seeing it differently now, not the town I'd fled, but the place where he'd stayed, where he'd built, where he'd waited without expectation. At the bakery, Mrs. Patterson welcomed me with the warmth of someone who'd witnessed my history, who'd participated in its keeping. She signed coffee? With the fluency he'd learned from her, and I nodded, sat at the small table by the window, waited for whatever came next. What came next was my sister, bursting through the door in her way, all energy and intention, newly married and already managing everyone else's crises. You're here, she said, speaking and signing simultaneously, the way she'd learned from me. Good, I've been looking for you. We need to talk about Mom. What about Mom? She's selling the house, didn't she tell you? She's been talking about it for months, ever since the wedding planning started. She says it's too big, too much, but I think... My sister stopped, really looked at me. You didn't know. Of course you didn't know. You never know anything because no one tells you, because they all think they're protecting you from something. I sat with this new information, feeling the pattern emerge, the protection that was concealment, the love that was silence, the narrative of my fragility that had been constructed without my consent. Tell me, I said. Everything no one thinks I can handle. And she did. The house, my father's health scare the previous year, the money troubles they'd hidden, the way they'd been preparing for a future that didn't include this town, this history, these rooms where I'd become who I was. She told me about Elijah too, what she knew, what she'd guessed, the way she'd watched him at the wedding and understood before I did that his devotion was also his prison. He's not the only one, she said. You're in a prison too. The one where you're the brave survivor who doesn't need anyone, who built a life alone because alone was safe. I watched you do it. I watched all of us let you do it, because it was easier than offering something you might refuse. I looked at her, my sister who had always been more direct than me, more willing to risk rejection for connection, who had married here, stayed here, built something visible while I built something hidden. What do you want from me? I asked. Presents, not just for weddings, for the hard stuff, for the conversations where you might not be the most comfortable person in the room. She reached across the table, took my hand. You're allowed to be difficult, Maya. You're allowed to need things that are hard to give, but you have to ask for them. You have to let people fill you and stay anyway. I thought of Elijah, his 15 years of preparation, his inability to simply be present in his imperfection. I thought of myself, my own preparations, my own escapes into competence and independence, and the story of the self I'd created alone. I need to see him, I said, again, properly, then do. But Maya? She squeezed my hand. Don't make him pay forever. That's not justice. That's just another kind of hiding. I found him at the river. Of course I did. The place where we kept meeting, where the ice held our history in its frozen depths, where the current moved beneath what appeared solid. My mother is selling the house, I signed. My father had a health scare. My sister thinks I'm a coward. And I stopped, gathered myself. I think I've been asking you to be present when I'm not present myself. I've been here physically, but somewhere else emotionally, waiting for you to fail or succeed so I could decide how to feel. What do you need? He signed. Not what you want to test. What do you actually need? It was the right question, I stood on the bank of the frozen river and let myself want something specific, something costly, something that would require both of us to be different than we'd been. I need you to take me somewhere you've never been with anyone else, somewhere that isn't about me or us or your guilt, somewhere that is only yours, that you've kept separate, that I can see without it being preparation or performance. He was quiet for a long moment, then, "There's a place, my mother's garden. She kept it after I left, and I maintain it now. No one else goes there. I haven't." He stopped. "I've never wanted to share it." "Why?" "Because it's where I go to not be the person who dared you onto the ice. Where I plant things and watch them grow, and don't have to be anything but someone who can make life happen in small ways." "Show me." We walked in silence, the cold sharp enough to demand attention, the town giving way to fields, to the edge of development, to a small plot behind a house that was no longer his. The garden was dormant now, the beds covered in straw and snow, but I could see the structure of it, the careful planning, the rotation of crops, the markers in his mother's hand and his own, layered years of attention. "She taught me," he signed. "After I started learning to sign, she said I needed something to do with my hands that wasn't about you, something that was about life continuing." I walked through the garden, seeing the evidence of his years, the fruit trees he'd planted young, now mature, the perennials she'd established, still returning, the small greenhouse where he started seeds in February, the light he provided, the warmth he maintained against the cold. "You built a world," I signed, "while I was gone. A whole world. I had to. The alternative was—" He stopped. "The alternative was waiting for you in a way that would have destroyed me. I had to believe I was building something, even if you never saw it." I turned to face him. The garden was ugly now, winter stripped, the beauty latent rather than visible, but I could feel it, the patience it represented, the faith in futures. "I want to help you plant," I signed. "Next season, I want to be here for that, for the beginning, not just the harvest you've prepared." "You don't know if you'll be here." "No, I don't, but I want to plan for it anyway. I want to act as if forgiveness is possible, as if we can build something from this, as if the ice doesn't have to be the last thing we share." He was still for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small envelope, worn with handling. "I've carried this for 10 years. He signed. "A letter. To you, in case I ever saw you again. In case I found the courage to give it. Give it now." He handed it over. I opened it, my hands cold enough to fumble, and read the words he'd written in a voice I couldn't hear. "Maya, if you're reading this, I found you. Or you found me. Or somehow, against probability and time, we are in the same place again. I have practiced saying I'm sorry until my hands ache. I have built a life around the possibility of your return. And I know this is not healthy. Know it in the ways my therapist knows it. My friends know it. The women I've tried to love who left because they couldn't compete with a ghost. But I'm not sorry for loving you. I am sorry for how I loved you. Carelessly, dangerously, with the arrogance of someone who thought love meant possession rather than protection. I am sorry for the dare, the ice, the years of silence that followed. I am sorry for learning your language in secret, for making my devotion into performance, for preparing so thoroughly that I forgot how to simply be with you in the present. What I want, if you can forgive any of it, is to start over, not as children, not as the people we were, but as adults who have been damaged and have damaged, who know the cost of connection and choose it anyway. I want to learn you again. Not the you I remember, the you I practiced for, but the you are now. However that is, however difficult, however much work. The garden is waiting, I am waiting, not with expectation, I've learned not to expect, but with hope, which is different, which is harder, which is the only thing I have left to offer. Elijah. I read it twice. 3 times. The cold made my eyes water, or something did, and I looked up to find him watching me with the expression I'd seen the day I arrived. Hope held carefully, prepared for disappointment. You wrote this 10 years ago? Yes. Before you knew if I'd ever come back? Yes. And you kept it, kept hoping. I kept living. He signed. The hope was part of that. Not all of it. I built the clinic. I worked with patients. I grew things in this garden. But yes, I kept hoping. I don't know how to stop. I folded the letter, returned it to the envelope, tucked it into my own pocket. I'm keeping this. Of course. And I'm coming back. Not permanently, not yet, but for planting season, for the beginning, to see if we can start something without knowing how it ends. He nodded, the gesture small, controlled. But I saw what it cost him, the restraint, the not asking for more, the acceptance of partial presence is better than absence. That's enough, he signed. That's everything. It wasn't everything. It was a beginning, or another middle, or whatever came after the long preparation and the hard revelation. We stood in his mother's garden in the winter that would eventually end, and I chose to stay in the story rather than walk away from it, to see what could be built on ground that wasn't as solid as I'd believed, that wasn't as ruined as I'd feared. The ice would melt, the seeds would wait for warmth, and we would learn to be with each other in the present, imperfect, unprepared. Finally, here.